I have seen the question, what is the best PlayStation 2 emulator for mini PC solutions? So this is what we're going to be chit-chatting about today. I've been reviewing all kinds of mini PCs and PlayStation 2 is one of the platforms I love to test out. We have actually a lot of different ways to approach this. So where we have the mini PC solutions, and yeah, there are like old and new version that can play emulation on native resolution, but also 4K. I think the biggest challenge we're facing is finding the right mini PC, simply because there are so many different older and newer versions out there. And this is, I think, the biggest problem. So we're going to be sticking to a certain brand like Dell or HP to make it easier, and also doing chit chat about what kind of minimum specs we're having for having an okay, decent overall PlayStation 2 emulation experience. Where this has nothing to do with mini PCs, I do want to implement this in the video. How about game boxes? I have reviewed way too many of these things, and where most of them will have just a basic S905, let's say, version of the chipset. And most of them, or they don't have any support for PlayStation 2, and even if it had support for PlayStation 2, it will not run on those $50 boxes. But there is one particular one that does have PlayStation 2 support, and that is the brand new version of the Kinhang. And yeah, when it comes to the overall performance, that is quite of a disappointing situation, but I do want to implement it in this video to showcase that beside mini PCs there was one single one that has the option for PlayStation 2. The X5 Pro was one of the, let's say, fastest boxes Kinhang has released of the Super Console X lineup, and was capable of actually running PlayStation 2 games. Because this particular model runs with the Rockchip 3588S, a very powerful one compared with the competition. The system itself came with Pegasus front end and a lot of emulators on the back end. And when you're going to be looking at it, this thing has been capable of also running Sega Saturn and some other systems like GameCube. However, this video is of course about PlayStation 2. And PlayStation 2 was problematic, to say at least. And this has to do because we're actually having an Android box that can play PlayStation 2, but the limitations of the emulator and of course the power combined. So where this thing has options to play thousands of different games, PlayStation 2 was a little bit too much for it. Where with the less demanding games were playable and the overall frames per second was not bad at all. So where this particular Android box does have a lot of potential when it comes to PlayStation 2 emulation, I think with a very heavy price point of 200 plus, depending where you're looking at and what kind of sale, it was quite expensive. And when you're looking at the performance, when you're going to be looking into mini PCs, mini PC has so much more better options when it comes to that amount of money. But when it comes to the overall emulation performance, you can just see that it stutters here and there, but the overall, let's say, performance, depending on what kind of game playing, seems to be working just fine. So let me check if I can even do something here. Yep, we can move because the touch is enabled. So let's see if we can get into the game. But it's quite unfortunate, so we need to figure out how to get this all working, how to get out of the game, because that is something we need to see if we can mess around with the settings. I find it quite unfortunate that all of these things have so many problems, even it's like missing out configurations. So we need to get into the menu somewhere and mess around with it. But so far so good. Take consideration what kind of game you're playing. Also depends how it will run, because there is such an, let's say, let's pushing this thing to the edge, and of course the emulator doesn't support everything when it comes to the ETH TX2. It's an unfinished, unpolished, let's say, emulator so far, I know. Oh, there it goes, it drops significantly into frames. There we go, oh yeah! So let's deep dive into the mini PC solutions, because I think combined with Batocera, we can have an overall great experience. You can also use Windows with a separate emulator if you want to, but I just wanted to do a deep dive into Batocera, what I've been testing a lot nowadays, and then we're going to be checking out which kind of mini PC is actually the best one for you. Some of them will have native resolution support but can't upscale due of a bad GPU on board, but some have like some amazing performance. Of course, if you want to get some PlayStation 2 4K rendering resolution, surprise, you need to buy a very expensive PC. I want to give you a couple of examples, like what can we do when it comes to form factors, because so here we're having different, let's say Open, Asus, AMD Trident, you name it, there are all kinds of different form factors out there. And I think there are a couple of them out there that are like really interesting. Not only if they're cheap, but also they have like all kinds of cool capabilities. And some of them you can switch between Windows and have the option to play old school PlayStation 2 Emulation and switch back to Windows and play old school or newer games. In the end, there are many ways to play, so let's get started into it with the first example. So let's start off what not to buy. And the reason I needed to implement this too is because there are a lot of these products out there are promising us to have PlayStation 2 emulation. Where the case itself, I just love it. I can tell you when starting it up for the first time, it was one freaking nightmare. They were actually using a Celeron CPU, the 1037U. Yeah, that is not great at all. So after an hour or so, like tinkering with it, I managed to boot it up. And you know, in the end, this thing can have a lot of cool things to it when it comes for emulation. Think about MAME, stuff you couldn't play on those cheap game boxes. Unfortunate, the first time I booted up, yeah, it was not working at all. And getting into the PlayStation after an hour or so, no, this is not going to be a very pleasant experience. Just wanted to play some Burnout. Man, this is such a cool like overall franchise. But you can just see that this is running on such a low frames per second. This is just completely unplayable. And I'm not surprised at all. I don't know how they did an original configuration, but these mini PCs are so old. It is great to actually play some Sega Naomi or maybe some Sega Saturn, but also there we will find a lot of limitations. And with PlayStation 2, so I came across this Open mini PC. It was an Intel i5 and I was thinking, hey, this can be interesting, but it was only in second generation. So with the connectivity, it's all fine with DVI or DisplayPort. But looking into it, yeah, this thing comes with a 2520M. Yeah, that's actually 2.50 GHz, a CPU core of 4. So I was thinking, you know, let's try some PlayStation 2. But the overall result was kind of disappointing. Yes, indeed, let's get ready for the next battle. Moving on to some PlayStation 2 emulation native, because yeah, we didn't have great emulation performance with PlayStation 1 and upscaling. And the PlayStation 2 is so much more difficult and it does have a lot of struggles. Yeah, you know, maybe with a couple of games are not demanding, we do have some overall emulation performance that is playable, but yeah, this i5 is just too much when it comes to the PlayStation 2 emulation, and that is quite unfortunate because I love the PlayStation 2 system itself. Another golden oldie is the Supreme console from the Ken Hank franchise. I don't know they're selling it, but if you're going to be comparing this like between all of the game boxes, this was actually the Supreme one, like the king of them all. And the thing had actually emulation support for PlayStation 2. But the weird thing is when you're comparing this with the CPU of an Pi 4 and etc, it's better, but it was really old. A processor called the Intel Xeon, and this was the A3-15005M running on 2.80 GHz, and this old beast had a capable option to run PlayStation 2. So PlayStation 2, when looking at the FPS, it's quite good, but you can see already more like this has some rendering issues, and I did see it before. And I'm guessing this is not because we're playing this on Batocera, but I think it's more like a problem with the emulator itself. And hoping in the future stuff like this and glitches will be fixed. But let's get into the low budget and the good stuff. So I noticed this mini ITX PC, bought it used. You can build it yourself if you want to, but it's going to be bigger than a ProDesk of HP. But this thing came with an i5 also in it, with a 7500T, where this is already an older version of the Intel series. But the overall performance, when actually looking into it in combination with the Intel Graphic HD 630, the overall PlayStation 2 performance was surprisingly good. PlayStation 2 with some Tekken 5. It's maybe not the most demanding game. I did notice some minor hiccups, but 1080p, getting into the game, everything seems to be running just fine. So it is absolutely amazing to see that also this CPU-GPU combination let us enjoy those old school games in high resolutions and having some overall great experience. Some games like God of War that has like a lot of difficulty like emulating particularly because they are quite difficult to emulate itself, you should consider getting a different resolution going on. So there's a little bit of tweaking you need to do with every single game. So now we're running on the i5 7th generation, and this has the option also do a little bit of an upscaling. But if you want to find a new way and still a cheap way, the N100 from Intel is a quite interesting chipset, because this thing is capable of running PlayStation 2, and we can do it on a really, let's say, tiny budget. We have all kinds of, let's say, mini devices, so it depends what kind of form factor you want to buy. Also the form factor influence, let's say, in the end, the price of the device, but some of them are like over $100, some a little bit more, and with these devices we can play all kinds of old school games. However, it's going to be really interesting because with PlayStation 2 emulation it is possible to actually play that. The N100 is absolutely amazing because we can run PlayStation 4 on, let's say, 720p. I've been saying it to 1080p, but the overall performance was not the, let's say, it's not the experience you want to. You had some minor slowdowns here and there. Look at the page itself, you can just actually see there are so many different solutions out there on AliExpress. And that is one thing you need to take consideration before you're going to be deep diving into the N100 Intel chipset. There are all kinds of different versions out there. Here in Europe we have different stores that can deliver within 5 or 7 days. But also another thing, they try to lure you in. Looking at some of the pages, they are super cheap, thinking, hey, this can be a very cool deal, but when you're clicking on it, they will showcase let's say an older model. So that is something you always need to be, very careful with, that you're not ordering the wrong different version. Okay, so let's take a close look at the factory direct collected store. So when it comes to these stores and all of these pages, this is a great example, €127, and there's even a sale coming up that it will drop to 113. That is an absolutely great deal, but you can see the bundle is 8GB, 256GB European version. So first of all, you need to buy the version where you're actually living. So the European version will have a different plug, but also you can just click, this doesn't show over here the N100, and it does over here. So in other words, this thing will cost 140, in the sale 126, and that is the thing you need to look out for, that you click on the exactly model, because with 8GB, 256GB EU, it's highly possible you're getting an older version. They don't really state it in the text over here in the bundle, but it will in the title, so I'm giving you the N5095. So in this the confusing part. So this thing costs 140. It's still a pretty good deal, especially with the flash, but still you just need to double check everything before you're going to be clicking and accepting to buy something. Okay, don't forget that you can buy a mini PC sometimes without storage, without RAM. So the thing is, when you're buying it without RAM, it's always a hassle. You need to buy RAM in your local store. But if you can buy it without storage but do with RAM, it's going to be more convenient if you want to put a Batocera drive in it. I personally went for the smallest form factor on AliExpress. Take consideration that this is not going to be inconveniencing in many ways. It does have 2 HDMI connections if you want to use this thing actually like a Windows emulation machine thing. But yeah, the compact size comes also with a very high price. And that's the downside to this. And if you're looking online, you can find, let's say, the N100 for way less money. And in the future, it's going to be even cheaper and cheaper. If you want to grab something plug and play from AliExpress, but you do want to have something that is capable of running more and has less limitations, this very strange looking 3D printed case is actually some of the things you can consider with the N100 mainboard in the inside, where they're using in China a lot of old parts when it comes to PCs. This is a brand new part so far, I understand. The case itself is debatable if you like it or not. However, this is a very interesting option, plug and play ready, and you can play actually thousands of different games. Yep, sliding it out, you can see they're using just a Batocera drive in here, a single slot of RAM, and having the N100, a brand new board. So that's absolutely cool with an active situation. But this is quite interesting because this is a board that has a lot of options when it comes to emulation itself. But with PlayStation 2, we do have some great performance. Native resolution, we can play a lot of games. I would maybe always say like all the games. But if you're going to be having a little bit of an upscaling going on, depending on what kind of game. So for example, having the game over here, the Contra game, we can even do a little upscaling for 80p or maybe even 1080p, 720p. But again, it's going to be a hit or miss with some of these systems. So that's absolutely awesome that we can finally play some PlayStation 2 on emulation on a quite cheap box. And I think that's one of the benefits of, let's say, the performance of many, let's say, newer generation of chipsets. Technology is becoming cheaper and faster, and that's one of the cool things. So I do wonder if you have like cheap PCs in the future that can also play PlayStation 3. Regarding PlayStation 3, let's get into it, because this is just going to be a completely different story. Woo! Boss battle! Yeah! And they also made another N100 version, and this is just, I think it's also called the AK1 Pro or some kind, another Super Console X clone, but this is the same kind of mainboard, only in the normal, let's say, horizontal case. It's also 3D printed, the same kind of quality on the outside, but also the mainboard is exactly the same. But you can see they are being really creative when it comes to the N100, but the price range compared with one you can make yourself is of course way higher. But then we're having the MSI Trident, a familiar brand. And with this particular model we do have an Intel in combination with a GPU of Nvidia. And it's a very interesting combination. You can also use it with Windows gaming, but also you can use it with Batocera. And what is convenient that with the combination we do have more possibilities, particularly when it comes to the GPU side. Yes, this is an older GPU, and 1060 exactly, and small factor, 3 GB. But when you're looking at the CPU, we're having an i5 6th generation today, but you also have a 7th generation and i7, so we have different formats. And of course different CPU-GPU combination will give different results. But I think it's a very interesting, capable device to do some little emulation. 2 seems to be working just fine on this, and yeah, it's still running on Batocera, but maybe if you're going to use some different emulators or you run on the Windows, you can even get better performance. But then overall, it's pretty damn awesome to see PlayStation 2 is finally working very well. So this was actually the most powerful retro gaming machine they released from the Super Console X line. However, this was just a mini PC you can also buy separately, and that's the reason I wanted to focus on the mini PCs, because this particular solution has also been upgraded, and also bought that one too, and I did some crazy cool emulation and gaming on these devices. But what China does, we can also do it ourselves, and I mean particularly when it comes to adding some Batocera to it, because that is the thing they're doing. So this G6 Super Console X was very expensive, and I just wanted to pick it up anyway. However, when you're going to be looking at the PC, the design was quite nice, but specification wise, so this thing, I love the design, but it has like an overall, let's say, an older i9 9th generation 8 core in it with a GTX 1650. I have set it to 1080p. I'm just curious like how fast it will load up and how it will run. Now we do have some weird glitching going on, maybe we can fix with another thing, but I just wanted to see how the speed of the game is. Because yet with the Vulkan backend we can even push it up to 1080p. But getting into the most expensive, yeah, that was actually one of the most expensive gaming PC emulator retro devices I actually picked up. So this was an i9 12th generation with an RTX 3050 in the inside, and the 3050 was by the way also in a TI. However, they also have now a 4060, and later on in the future is going to be having more power for the same amount of money actually. However, this i9 was a quite nice powerhouse when it comes for emulation and performance itself. But with emulation, it's all fun and game with 4K rendering resolution, but getting such a powerful device like this i9 in combination with an RTX card, yeah, I think you need to take consideration if you just want to do only some PlayStation 2 emulation. Yeah, this is going to be completely a waste of money and overkill. I think you need to buy a mini PC like this if you also want to play some Windows games on 1080p, and in some cases even newer stuff on higher resolution. PlayStation 2 and my favorite game, Tekken 4. Nevertheless, we're having absolutely amazing overall performance with PlayStation 2, and you can even upscale it to higher resolutions if you want to without any problem. Okay, so let's move on to some cheap AMD Ryzen solutions. I reviewed a full review of the Elite Pro Desk, and this Pro Desk is quite interesting. And when you're looking at the specifications, this is a very old AMD Ryzen 3 Pro 2200GA. But what I love about this device is that it comes with a very cool built-in GPU. And the GPUs, where I'm like an Intel fan for many years, the GPUs on the AMD side, or particularly the Ryzen ones, are pretty good. And that also results in having some okay performance with emulation and upscaling. Moving on to the PlayStation 2, we have great performance with 1080p rendering resolution. And yep, you can do tweaking here and there, but I am quite satisfied with such an overall good performance with a Tekken 5. The game has never been looked so great, and then for such a low-powered mini PC. And that, I think it has to do thanks to the GPU, because this gives us so many cool new upscaling options. Dolphin, but also the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 and many other systems.
Round 2. Fight.
But let's try another game, a two-dimensional fighting game, and yep, we're having over here 4K rendering resolution with PlayStation. So I had the option to do this with Tekken, but I didn't want to do this because I know the two-dimensional stuff is less demanding. But you can see full 4K rendering resolution, great performance on this mini PC. And that's what I exactly mean. We need to do tweaking and tweak your favorite game to a certain level that makes it still playable and look amazing. For PlayStation 2 emulation, a high clock speed processor is key. However, when it comes to the AMD Ryzen, the 5000 series is going to be, I think, an entry point where we do have some really good overall performance. And with this mini forum, this is by the way the 5900HX, but this is a very powerful one when it comes to the 5000 series, with a newer generation onboard GPU giving us some overall good performance. With the AMD Ryzen we can do a little bit of an upscaling, and we do have some really great performance with PlayStation 2 on the full speed. But let's get into some old school SSX tricky.
You're welcome to Garibaldi. Give me them frequent flyer miles. Method. Now you're playing with style.
From here, it's going to be only better, of course. 6000 generation is going to be an interesting one to check out too. And this is another powerful one, and also let's say this is going to be an absolutely powerhouse with even more power, better GPU, and this is going to be absolutely amazing if you have to do some emulation on 4K rendering resolution, where it does come with a heavy price point, but maybe in the future they are going to be way cheaper. And I think if these are becoming cheap, you're going to have like an overall cool deal. The 6000 series come in all kinds of different variations. This is a powerful one, the AMD Ryzen 9 6900HX, that is actually an 8-core 16 threads, and of course comes with quite a nice powerful, let's say, GPU on board. And I think that is an interesting part of the upscaling want to do. Of course, DDR5 dual channel memory. With Windows gaming we had some very good overall performance. Let's move on to some emulation and see how we can push this device with some 4K emulation with some emulators.
Final round. Fight.
But of course we do have many options now, and the AMD Ryzen 7000 but also the 8000 and new one in the future when you're watching this video are capable of running PlayStation 2 on 4K rendering resolution without any problem. And I think at that point you need to think, what do you really need? If you don't care about the 4K rendering resolution, you can get yourself like a really cheap Intel or an older AMD Ryzen to have a lot of fun for not a lot of money. But if you want to have some serious power, or you find the middle road between it, there are many different ways to play, and of course it's all depending what you want to play. And with this machine we can also play all kinds of 4K rendering resolution without any problem. And yeah, this is not going to be an issue, and it's going to be a lot of fun in the future because all of these PCs are becoming cheaper and cheaper in the end. Thank you all for watching. I hope this video helped out, giving you an idea what you can actually do with certain kind of chips and what kind of PCs you can buy. Consider subscribing, hit the little bell, and it would be great to see you in the next video.